Hello. Just didn't really give anybody a heads up, but I'm going live and I am really just going to dive right in. This is the article I'm going to read is specifically about the psyche, the psychology behind what I think would be the type of person that Kegan Kline is, of what we know of him. He is being investigated in regards to the Delphi double homicide of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. Let me share my screen here. I already have it up. This is these two beautiful girls. Abby was 13 and Libby was 14 at the time of their murders. This happened on February 13th, 2017 at approximately 1 p.m. Just a basic overview, because most of us that are here, we know this case inside and out. But for anyone that is new to it, Abby and Libby were murdered in February 13th of 2017. They were dropped off at the Monon High Bridge Trail System area, and Libby took a video of her would-be killer, and they have stated that this is the person that they believe murdered them, as you can see him right here. Gray Hughes Investigates did a video where he stabilized this, and it is a heck of a lot easier to view. You will be able to find it on his channel under, I think, Delphi, maybe Delphi Bridge Stabilized. And he said these words. I hear, "Hey guys, go down the hill. Get down the hill." But what they say is, "Guys, down the hill." I don't know. It just something that is, I think, more common to say is, "Hey guys, go down the hill." That just makes sense for me, but it is just my opinion and nothing more. So when they failed to meet their father to pick them up, the family was called, they started calling around. They weren't answering their phones. And they started a search around, and then they called the police around 5 o'clock on the 13th, and they searched all through the night. And the search was called off by ISP, or, by a group of law enforcement officials. And the reason was because it was too dangerous, and frankly, they can't be held liable for someone else falling, someone else getting hurt. And it's a real possibility out there, even in the middle of the day. There's steep ravines and drop-offs, and it's not like your typical, even for Indiana terrain, it's pretty, it's pretty steep out there in certain areas. And it's pitch black, it was already dark by the time they were doing the interviews online, with the news cameras that were out there. You couldn't see behind them. They had their face lit up, and that was about all you could see. And that's the reason that the search was called off. And anyways, it resumed again the next day, and they were found before noon on the 14th. They had been murdered, and their bodies had been left close to Ron Logan's property. It was actually owned by a trust. That little plot right there was owned by Niche, Niche Trust, and it is a part of like the historic trails. Actually, the whole Deer Creek right there with this is where Riley Park came from. The poet. James Whitcomb Riley, I believe that's his name. But, on the banks of Deer Creek, that's where those poems come from. And the whole area, including the houses, Ron Logan's house was a part of the historical society land. So was the cemetery, Kay Weber, all along Deer Creek right there. All of those houses are, or most of them are historic. And so that was my first experience with Delphi, was actually going there as a kid in middle school. I think we went. I think it was like my fifth grade, maybe sixth grade year. And I believe we went out there a couple different times. And I can just remember thinking like, wow, because it is very isolated, but all along there is so many different historical things. And our teacher was really into, it was through, I was homeschooled, so it was through the 4-H program. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful area. It's a beautiful area to stop off and go hiking and get some fresh air. The creek obviously is a highlight for fishing and just hanging out with friends. And it's exactly what those girls intended to do that day. Not knowing that there was a murderer that was out there as well, and that they would be meeting their demise. I will say that it has come to light that they were talking with someone online. And in the beginning of the case, that was totally not something that law enforcement or family or anybody had to say. I did hear that from a family member that is our families. We have our family where they're actually related, and then we have the people that our family has adopted, I would say. And one of the girls' friends that they were staying with was my aunt's adopted, family. So we had holidays with them and stuff like that. I didn't know her very well, but I do trust like my cousin and my aunt. And so, yeah, that was something that they had told us but the way they told it was different. It wasn't Libby that was meeting a boy online. It was Abby. And I say that, but this person, my family member, they do not follow this case. They don't know what either of the girls even look like. They're just not, this isn't their jam. And so I feel like it was just one of those things that was, they just didn't know which girl they were talking about. But that's what I had heard from the beginning. But no, it wasn't Abby. The interviews with Kegan Kline are clear that it was Libby that Kegan was talking to through the Anthony Schatz account. And again, I don't want that to be starting a rumor mill at all. It was just, there were differences in the stories that I was told, and I believe law enforcement. I believe the interviews. I believe that would be a ridiculous thing to lie to Kegan about in the interview affidavit. Just, it wouldn't make any sense. You know what I mean? But anyways, I was told that the girls, one of them didn't want to go, thought they knew it was kind of like sketchy to meet someone, and they were trying to get their friends to meet up. And it only ended up being the two of them, but they didn't want the other one going by themselves. And so they both went. And I think that's why Liberty was kind of already on, in just my opinion, that's why Liberty was kind of already on the lookout, that's why she took that video. But then again, my kids have done that. My daughter was the same age as Libby at the time of her murder. And, I watch my daughter grow up and I think about all of the things that I've gotten to see with her that they didn't get to have that. And it just those parallels there that, it could have been my kid. And I'm so sorry that it was yours at the same time, like you feel bad for, shoo, wasn't my daughter, but it's her friend, and my daughter looks so much like Liberty. And the way that her family describes her is just like my daughter. She was a defender, like she stood up for her. She was, and her little friend was a little tiny, tiny little bit of a redhead. And they used to go out. We have an area like that where I live, and we used to let them go out there all the time. Didn't think a thing about it, and that day it was just kind of like, wow, no, this is, oh, my first thoughts were when it was on the news at night was like, oh, silly girls. Like I would hurt my children my daughter, if she did that to me, just like staying out or going to a movie or, whatnot. And like, they'll be home probably while I'm asleep, and then waking up the next day and didn't even think anything about it in the morning, but turned the TV on while I was like cleaning, and it was the live footage, and it was just, once they finally like confirmed it, I can remember that next day at the school bus stop, and there were parents lined up and down the street. Like nobody in our neighborhood anyway let their kids just walk a couple blocks to the bus stop. They were driving them or they were escorting them. And it was just like, wow, our town, our Indiana, our safe place is forever changed. And now we have to make adjustments, and still thinking like it was probably, like someone they knew. Like my first thought was they were lured there by some girls, and were killed by them. And I think that was only because of the Skylar Niece case, because it had been a documentary that I'd watched. A little girl was lured out of her home in the middle of the night by two of her best friends, and they killed her. And so that was a story that was like fresh in my mind. So I think that's probably why I had that original thought. But then realizing like, after 2 weeks went by and they're just like, what the hell? Like, why is this person not caught? And then it was like, okay, I'm going to like Google some things, and I found this big, huge, back then, I don't even know if it still exists, but it was a big old group, Facebook group for justice for Abby and Libby. And just watching that, I didn't really ever comment or anything, but just kind of watching like what people were saying. And it was all the same old things, like this case has been very cyclic. It goes through cycles of, it started off with pedophiles because of the Packers plant. And I'm not sure about now. I haven't looked lately, but back then when I Googled it, it was like, holy, like shit. Like why are there so many pedophiles in this tiny little town in Indiana? And it's not because they're residents in Delphi. It's because they work there. And if you would, and once I was looking, I was like, there's just way too many. And it was all because they worked at Packers, the pig plant. And so then, going down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, I think the first one I really was remember thinking, ooh, wow, was someone that no one even mentions. He's a monster. But he is convicted now of pedophilia. His name was James Duvall, I believe. James Duvall. And yeah, it was a real creepy dude. And then there was he tried to kill the little girl, but she got away. And then somehow he got out, and it was freaking expunged. But you can still find it in like I think it was in Justia where I found it. But yeah, so you go through all of these like different things, and then early on, I had done something like really dumb, and I kind of turned someone in and then contacted them, which is just I know better now, but back then it was kind of I thought I was helping, like maybe this woman didn't know that she was married to a pedophile, and like how would I feel if nobody warned me but they knew? And it did not go well, so I got a death threat, and then I had to kind of back away, but I still always followed all the groups and everything. And then I think I became really kind of more active in like 2018. Maybe it was closer to 29. No, it was 2018. But yeah, it's been a weird long case, and we've been through so many different killers and just people naming people, and it's just been a crazy it's disturbing is what it is. And just trying to stick with like factual things is seems to be the it doesn't seem to be very popular. It seems like the wilder the theory, the more people cling to it. I'm not sure why a double homicide that is described as, you know, um, the worst thing these detectives have ever seen, brutal, like all of the ways and how you left them in those woods is not how they are today. When he said that, I was like, wow, like this is something different. And then having all of the FBI presence, the ISPs, all the way down to local, like we had every agency involved, even Disney and NASA, you know, and they just couldn't get it. And I think that with the search, I think you got to remember it's a small town, and the search was kind of just willy-nilly. And if you think about what that can do to evidence, like I took a class on for SARS to get certified to do search and rescue, and wow, that was eye-opening. That was eye-opening because when you do a search like that, there is a certain way that it's done. And I mean, you have to be so mindful of every step you take. Everything is checked and double checked, and everything is in a pattern. And that way you're not disturbing any evidence. There's rules about if you see something, you stop where you are, you call out, like you don't just go running up and like disturb the crime scene area. And that just, I think it was in the sheriff, Tobe Lesenby, in his interview with HLN, he had said, or it could have been Kim Riley. I think it was actually Kim Riley. It said, like, it was one of those two. There was footprints everywhere, and that's unfortunate because that could very well have been. I know that they went to Packers at some point because they took out Boots. There was a bomb threat that everybody speculated was related to, something different that they thought it was really related to this when they were saying it was a bomb threat or whatever. And then especially when they come out with Boots. And I mean, I could just go on and on. But hi, everybody. Hey, Dee. Hey, Amy, Celeste, Freckle Joy, Lilith, Forever, Delphi Truth Squad, Crimezilla. Hello. Thank you. Dan, hello. Daisy, hi. lighting the way home for the vanished. Good to see you here. Grandma Sherry, always good to see your comments. Okay. But anyways, just so you can see their faces, see how beautiful, like these were real children. You know, they're not just something that you talk about online with your sleuthing buddies. Like these were two beautiful girls. This is Abby and her mom said this picture was taken. They were going to I believe it was like a shower, whether it was a wedding shower or a baby shower, I'm not sure. But and it was Kentucky Derby themed, and that's why she has this hat on that she, you know, looks so beautiful in. Like this was a happy day and a day that you thought you would have many, many, many more of them. And she should have been able to have that with her daughter. One of her statements that I just, it just kind of rocks you is she's talking about the killer, and he said he can rot in jail, or they can give him the death penalty and put a needle in his arm. It will just be a piece of the puzzle put into place, but Abby will still be the piece that's missing. You know, and it's simple, but it is just so true. And you know, in this one, I went back to the house and grabbed Abby's jacket because she was going to need it when we found her. You know, these weren't parents that were expecting this, and these definitely weren't parents. And I'm talking about Becky and Mike and Anna and her family and their close knit family there on each side. These were not families that were expecting their child to be murdered. They definitely don't want to be those families with a child that has been murdered. And they don't ever want to have to be walking in the shoes that they have been having to walk in for since February 13th of 2017, when their whole world it splits. You have your before murder, and then you have after. And then you also have this time of days and in a days, where it's all just adrenaline, emotion, and fear, then sadness. I mean, you go through everything in that first days of finding this news out or missing, and then murdered. And but you have things you have to do. You have to do interviews with law enforcement. You have to plan a funeral. You have to find a cemetery. There's so many things that you're forced to have to do, and you have to juggle all this. And in my opinion, these two families did an amazing job. And they took their tragedy of losing their children, and they turned it into a triumph, you know, like as cliche as that saying is. But and I'm sure that they would rather not have had to do this. Like they don't want to be the source of something good coming to the community. Bet on that, you know, but they were able to, like, they want their children to be remembered for the children that they were in this life, not the day they were murdered. And the park symbolizes that. And that's why I get so pissed off when people attack the families, and especially like, oh, look, you got this park, da 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 da, and all of this nonsense. It's just ignorance, and it's just stupidity, you know. And what would you do? You know, I hope I'm as brave as they are, and I hope that if this ever I'm in their shoes, I would turn it into a triumph of some kind and want the world to know how special my child is. And that's why they did what they did. And I personally think that is honorable. And I think they're pretty special. And I also get real sick of people accusing Kelsey and their other family members of being involved. I think it's ludicrous. It's absolutely Hickham's Dicum. It is not Occam's razor in the least. It's just the most wild, balls out. And why? Because she was inconsistent. And man, these groups, especially back then, I'm sure it's still going on now. I just can't be a part of them though. Like, these people just are brutal. They're just so hateful and spiteful and just nasty, you know? And these families have to put up with that and still keep trugging along like it. And if you really think about it, and you know, like the psychology of that DAZE, after missing and murdered, then here's my thing. If you have a family and extended family members and friends that all have the exact same story, and they have all the time, and everything is just repetitive and just repeated over and over again, of just like, oh, it was 4:05 p.m. and da 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 da, and that's a story that is they have collaborated on. But when you have inconsistencies that are later corrected once they have the digital footprint of where they were, hello, like that makes them human. It doesn't make them monsters. And it's just so ridiculous that these little tiny nitpicking things keep happening in this case. And it seems like, especially in the YouTube world, it saddens me to Google Abigail Williams and Liberty German, Delphi, and nothing but garbage like what I just got done talking about comes up, because these two little girls right here, they don't deserve that. They don't deserve to be treated that way in their death, and just to have a bunch of maniacs out spreading ridiculousness, you know, like they don't deserve that. And no matter who says something, just because someone says it and they can look really convincing, doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't matter what kind of a smile they had on their face or how sweet their voice sounds. There's the devil you know and the devil you don't see until after they've already wrecked your life. Hence, Anthony Greeno, Julie Melvin, Kelly Brown, you know, just to name a few of the ones that have been popping their heads up lately again. They've been downright hideous, and I'm sure I have the stuff saved. You know, I've just been around a long time and I see it all, and I have a really good memory. I don't have a good organization skills of saving everything into folders, so I just have 33,000 photos and videos on my phone that I need to go through still to this day, but I have not. And but anyways, that's why I've kind of decided to talk about Delphi. I don't do it very often, and it was for personal reasons. And I feel like they're getting really close now, and that's kind of affected my decision for personal reasons. And I think that I hope I've said this before, though, that this is a few weeks away. You know, this is a few weeks away, and the search of the Wabash and Kegan Kline and the seeming pressure that they were putting on Kegan in his interview with Indiana State Police to talk about his father. It was pretty obvious they were kept going back to him. Now, it could have been just to get him to lock into, no, this was you on this phone. This wasn't anybody else. This wasn't your friend. This wasn't your dad. This wasn't, you know, so-and-so. So it was you. You are doing all of these things. I mean, this is the biggest investigation of child pornography that Indiana has seen to date. And the amount of sharing, like it's crazy. I also wanted to show you guys this site that I found. It is, well, a friend sent it to me, and I'll tell you what, it is a really good, hopefully this link works. It's really, really good. Let me pull up the chat here. It's so weird that like my own stuff doesn't come up on my phone. I have to like go through a bunch of hoops to find my own life. Okay, so this is the website. I'm gonna put it in the chat really quick. That's no, I know what D. I did say Greeno, but he's caused a lot of he's caused a lot of the lies, just flat out lies in the Delphi investigation, or like the sleuthing part side of it, and claiming that he, and he edits things, and he's done a lot of damage in the past. Right now, the only news on him is that his channel was terminated. I still haven't looked up what that means, but yeah, terminated. And but I was talking more about the two ladies. And what do you mean? Oh my gosh, you goofball. I got you now. Yeah, and that's the thing, is there's been a lot of discussion of the dog walking lady, and he claims that it was a dog walking lady, and that he spoke to her, that he did an interview with you, that she was scared and like ran away. And the fact is that did not happen. I saw the messages, and again, they can be faked. Doug Rice, I didn't like him. I just going to be honest, didn't really care for the guy. I thought he was kind of an asshole, but one thing that he wasn't he wasn't into all of the speculation and rumors and drama. He knew his stuff, and he stayed with the facts. And I did appreciate that about him. And Miss Weber was in his group. And so all of this information is coming from them. And I believe them over freaking Greeno any day, because he is a known liar. He just, the amount of lies is abundant. And so when someone lies about one thing, then you can't believe them anymore. And that story was not true. It was a lady that was in her house, saw someone. So that part is true. She'd let her dog out. And, and he tried to say that he was friends with Miss Weber, and that he went to her house and had coffee and blah, blah, blah. And the fact is she thought he was a slime ball, and they were suspicious of him when she showed the picture to her friend, her neighbor, like, oh, that looks like the guy I saw. His family has reached out to me and said, we picked him up from there they think that he had something to do with this. And that's his family, the people that picked him up from there that day. Do I think that it's him? I don't have a think on anyone of who it is, not even Kegan Kline. I hope it's them. I hope it's Kegan. I hope it's somehow related to them so this can be over and move on to the next phase, because it's not like it's going to end. But it would be nice to know that this brutal murderer is behind bars. Thanks. Now he's in, I haven't called lately, but yeah, Lilith, he is in Carroll County Jail. There has been no changes. He said that he was going to be motioning the court for a short, like a shorting, sentence shortening, and so that would mean that he could get out in pretty soon if the judge does agree to that motion. That would be a I hope that would be a cold day in hell that they would let him out, especially with all the things that he's done and continued to do from behind bars and still doing to this day. He just deserves to have all the time and more that he does. But anyways, let me try not to get too sidetracked. Greeno cellmate. Hello. Yeah, D. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that I was able to warn you. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at this. It's really good. They give a timeline. So February 12th, Liberty German 14 and Abigail Williams 13 decided to have a sleepover at Liberty's house, knowing that they did not have school the next day. Super simple. Enough said, that's all you need to know. There was no school on Monday due to the snow days being built into the school calendar. I don't know if that's just something that's common to people from Indiana, but our school's done that from back when I was in school, to where they schedule in snow days because we did tend to get a lot of snow. And so that way school still ended on the same date. And so, there are days in the calendar year, like certain holidays, that they will, if they use up all their snow days, then they'll start using those up so that school still stays on schedule to end a certain time. But they used to have to what did they used to have to do? Say they would go into school longer until they changed it. And so it's just a simple thing of they didn't have any snow. And so they got the day off because it was scheduled into for a already off day because they thought they would have to take a different day for a snow day. It's not complicated. The girls do typical sleepover activities. Again, just super simple and so right. And Liberty's older sister, Kelsey, joins in. Kelsey said they all had a movie night and ate pizza. Abigail and Liberty stay up late. They paint a sign that says chocolate and take videos of each other just being goofy. Monday, February 13th, 10 a.m. approximately, the girls sleep in because they had been up late. Liberty's father, Derek, makes them pancakes for breakfast. Super normal. Derek leaves to go take photos for Becky's business. Libby's grandmother, Becky, makes a deal with the girls. She says if the girls help with the filing work, she'll give them some spending money, and maybe later on that day, she'll take them out shopping to go spend the money they just earned. The girls happily help with Becky's filing. And then it seems to go to 12 p.m. A suspicious vehicle is parked at the abandoned CPS DCS building on the east side of County Road 300 North next to the Hoosier Heartland Highway. So this is going back to the 2019 presser. And again, I think they knew exactly, they just wanted to know if anyone else saw what they saw. I don't think they were really looking for like some card that they didn't know about. That's just my opinion. Just the way they worded it. The girls asked Liberty's grandmother, Becky, if they could go to, this happens about 1 o'clock, go to the Monon High Bridge Trail. Becky says yes. And again, this is a website. Like, you verify everything that you can. And the best source is to get it from law enforcement or a close family member or, someone that is at least rational. My Lord. The trails could be considered to be a hangout for local teens their age. The girls were familiar with the Monon Bridge, and Libby would often visit the trail with her older sister to take photos. Taking photos. There was a shoe tree on the private drive there. I mean, it's just the landscape there is absolutely beautiful. The bridge is the source of multiple senior pictures. You could find those on Insta. It was a common place to go to take pictures. And so nothing odd. The trail is considered okay. The girls then asked Liberty's older sister, Kelsey, to drive them. Kelsey says that she can drive them there, but she cannot drive them back because she had plans to go to a friend's house and then work. Liberty called and asked her dad, Derek, if he could give them a ride back from the trail since Kelsey was unavailable. Derek agrees to be their ride back from the trail. He said he would pick them up once he was done taking photos for Becky's appraisal business. He estimated that he would be done with this photography work in Frankfort in a couple hours. There was no set time for the girls to return to their meeting point. The plan was that Derek would call or text them on his drive when he was close to arriving, and they would return to the trailhead to be picked up. The approximate time of when they might expect him to be there would be 3 to 3:30. 1:30, Kelsey picks up girls to take them to the bridge. So they all leave to go to the bridge at approximately 1:30. 1:38, phone records indicate Kelsey's boyfriend calls her at 1:38. Kelsey remembers already being on the phone with him when she dropped the girls off, meaning the drop-off could not have been any earlier than 1:38. Around this time, Libby calls and asks her dad, Derek, if he could give them a ride back. Derek agrees to be their ride back from the trail. Derek says he will pick them up once he is done taking photos for Becky's business. There was no set time for the girls to be picked up. Derek said he would call or text them once he was getting close to arriving, and they would return to the trailhead. Super simple. This is the Mary Gerard. This is Freedom Bridge. This is Hoosier Heartland Highway, or 25. They've got the 300. This is the cemetery. This is, Ron's property. This is the niche, Niche. It was back then, and then it was converted into, it was a list of like people, like I remember their names, but I'm not going to say. So, yeah, I don't know why everyone, it's like tit for tat, because like it's literally just a property line, and it's not like there is fencing. I don't know if it was there back then, but you can't fence off the water, the creek. But I figured it out one time, and like every part of it, like measured and everything. And it was still just on this little plot, but whatever. I get a little anal. This is Deer Creek, obviously. This is the 505. This is the 501 trail. This is about the area that they first encountered, saw the man, that we know of. And Libby took the video, and then we hear, hey guys, or guys down the hill. Kelsey drops them off at the entrance of Monon High Bridge Trail that is across from the Mears Farm, an official parking area, though it is not now. They were not dropped off at the Freedom Bridge parking area. Kelsey watches the girls walk until they got onto the trail. Kelsey does not notice anything unusual at the parking area before driving off. Sorry, my back is really hurting. So they even have on here, Libby takes a photo of the bridge. Abby and Libby start walking down the trail. Abby and Libby reach the beginning of the bridge. Liberty German uploads to Snapchat a picture of the Monon Bridge. Like, this is so, I'm just saying, this is so well done. Like, it's really well done. Libby uploads a picture of Abby walking on the bridge to Snapchat at 2:07 p.m. Both of these snaps were posted directly to Libby's story, meaning it was a post that was viewable by anyone of Libby's added friends on Snapchat. So 2:05 and 2:07. Unknown. An unknown time after the two snaps uploads, and of course we kind of do know that now, but uploads Liberty starts taking a video on her cell phone. Police say the girls mostly talk about stuff girls talk about, in quotes, in the recording, but later the girls mention of a man they noticed behind them on the bridge. Sheriff Lesenby says it appears the girls initially took pictures for fun, but later became uncomfortable and recorded the video as precaution. I find that to be very normal. I can't even tell you how many videos that I've got from my kids of like, Mom, look at this guy that was on the, and then when I got Snapchat, they would just snap me. And, but that I don't see anything nefarious about that. I do think that Libby was smart, and because of the classes she was taking, I think that it just makes sense. It made sense, and she's a hero, just like her grandpa said. In the release video, it is believed that Libby's perspective is from the southeastern side of the bridge, looking backwards towards the northwestern side of the bridge. So they have that for you. It has been theorized that the offender pulled a weapon or found a way to make the girls comply with his orders, according to an audio snippet from Libby's video recording. At some point, the offender said to them, guys, down the hill. The path the girls and the offender took after leaving the bridge is unknown. The arrows on the map are purely an abstract approximation. They are not intended to be taken literally. In between the southeastern edge of the bridge and the body disposal location, there is a shallow section of the creek. The shallow section varies between ankle to knee deep and can be waded through. True. 3:11. Liberty's grandmother Becky has said called records show Derek called Libby at 3:11, intending to tell them that he was getting close and they should start heading back to be picked up. As a point of reference, Derek remembers he was just starting to drive over the Wilson Bridge when he makes this 3:11 p.m. call. No one answers his call. Derek pulls into the parking area and does not see the girls. Derek calls Liberty's phone, but no one picks up. Derek knows it's not like Libby to ignore his texts and phone calls, especially when she was expecting him to call. He parks his car and begins walking the trails to search for the girls. Derek reaches the point where the trails intersect, and he stops a man dressed in a flannel shirt who is approaching the intersection coming from the 501. So he's coming this way, and Derek is coming this way. Derek asked the man with the flannel shirt, "Hey, did you happen to see two girls up there?" And the man replied, "No, I didn't, but there's a couple on the bridge." And they have references, and they're all at the bottom. This man with a flannel shirt later becomes a key witness in this case, and he is among the first to give a witness account to law enforcement. Online discussion outlets have nicknamed him Flannel Shirt Guy. Because Flannel Shirt Guy did not see the girls on the 501 trail, Derek started walking the other trail that leads directly to the creek edge called the 505. Actually, I'm going to click on this because there's so much information. I have to make sure it's not Greeno influenced. Oh, what number was that? Pfft. I don't remember. I thought it would just go straight to it. But anyway, that's up until that point. And then there's a few more entries, and definitely go and check this out. And like I said, they have everything referenced. Just remember, you got to remember the number. So 61, and there is a time-stamped video, so you can go straight to it.
All right, here we go. I'm going right now. Going on right now. Had to cut you off before you slammed me into the ground.
So that's cool. A lot of interviews that Gray did. I was going to play one while I go to the bathroom. I don't want to take people's content, so I was trying to find if there was any just news articles. I don't think there's anything on here that I could play that I wouldn't get copyright. Well, we'll just play a little bit of this while I go to the bathroom. I don't think Gray will mind. He likes the truth being out there, but I will link this right now.
Hello, this is Gray Hughes. Recently, I had the pleasure and honor of interviewing Mike and Becky Patty, the grandparents of Liberty German and her legal guardians. The interview was done via Skype, and it was very casual, so I'm not going to be showing the actual video part of it, but you'll hear all of the audio. We were discussing, and Mike was cooking dinner, so there's a lot of clanking and clunking, and there's a dog that barks every once in a while and growls, and just different sounds of people doing their normal things in a house. But the audio is very clear. You won't have any problem of hearing the audio. We did also have a time where there was a sound that sounded like an airplane going through the audio, and I was able to remove part of that. So it's not so dramatic, but you'll hear Mike refer to that in one of the lighter moments during the interview. So without further ado, let's get started on that interview right now. Can you tell us about Libby? I feel like that is something that the media doesn't cover quite as much.
Libby was a gentle soul. She was very laid back. She took after her dad a lot in that respect. Derek's very laid back, and so is Libby. It's hard to make her mad, but boy, if she wasn't happy with you, she'd let you know. She was a defender. If anybody was bullied, she would be right there to step in and protect them. She thought a lot of people. She would go out of her way to make her teachers feel better. She would leave us notes to find. I was out doing inspections one day, and I went to put my sun visor down, and on the back side of that sun visor was a sticky note. And that's the one that has been seen out there a few times. I love you, and I don't know what we'd do without you. That's just the way she was. She liked to make people smile. She left a sticky note for her band teacher and for him to find, and it said, "Band is awesome. You make band great." And she just did that to her teachers. Every time she had a new teacher, that was her new favorite teacher. She just loved them all.
I'm glad it was that part about getting to know Libby, you know. So yeah, I hope that, again, I'll put this link in there one more time. I hope everybody heads over here and really takes a close look at this. And I just, that way you have a place, whether whether there's something that's off just by a little bit, but this really is just like a good overview. And so when someone comes along and just says something all cockamamie, then you can well, no, let me show you here, because this person has taken the time to actually reference their work. Okay. It's very important. And honestly, if you are wanting to do a deep dive on Delphi, Greg Hughes Investigates, and Incognito Society, and Captain Howdy, that's all you need to know. That's really it. I don't know if Truth and Justice has any of her videos up. I was on Lighting the Way Home for the Vanished, and she went live about Delphi with me. There's just, but if you want a comprehensive look, Incognito Society and Greg Hughes Investigates. Incog did a whole walkthrough of every single bit of the news coverage, podcasts, where the family's talking. I mean, just went through every single thing. It's great. Let's take a little break and just stop in before we go on to reading this thing. Hey, Hoosier. Never Silent. Hi. Lipsha. Hello. Justice Angel. Yeah. That's the thing, is everybody, glad you aren't giving him any more. What can you do? We put our faith in people and we get invested in them, and it's hard to believe that they're not who they say they are. It happens so very often, not just Greeno, but the Greeno types. They talk about Kegan Kline as being manipulative and smarter. He's smart, and he uses that. He likes to play with people's minds, and that's kind of one of the things that kind of reminded me of him about Greeno. So, it is what it is, and now and that's you can't, be upset with but see, here I am, at one point I 2 was there, and I get upset with myself that I ever thought he was anything, other than a snake in the grass. It just it sucks. I'm glad you made it too, HCC. Yeah, shoes are important. Ah, me too. Never silent. There was no signal out there though. No, I mean it can kind of sometimes be spotty, but to say there's no signal, no. Um, there's been many of people go out there, and I mean I had signal, but again it was spotty. I think you're talking about Cheyenne. We can make noise while you take it. Yeah, right. They really do. It just goes by in a flash, and then one day you have a 20-year-old. Like, what? It's crazy. Check your messages, HCC. I didn't put anyone on the spot, but I could use a reader. Hey, Lost City of Atlanta. How are you doing? Good night, Justice Angel. Yeah, I thought it went really well, lighting the way home for the vanished. Yeah. Yeah, I think that I read the article on a live with or not the article, the interview that got released, the police interview that he did with ISB, and it was like it was on a live with Gray Hughes Investigates. I just did it one time, and then it was kind of like you don't really absorb so much when you're reading it like that. Like I don't, and so I've been reading it again and like highlighting and like taking notes on things. And man, when you really read it in its entirety, there's little sneaks of him. A lot of it seems like, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, like he's just kind of acting like a doofus. But then there will be these like snippets of what, it's in the written words. So you have to be mindful of that. But like where he will snap into this other persona and the like, well, I'm going to start reading this article. Okay, so when I started to read this I had him in mind. I had Kegan Kline in my mind, and that way, like obviously this would apply to whomever, insert serial killer, wannabe serial killer, going to be serial killer, but it's just a peer-reviewed article on scientific research. So It's an open access one, and I think it's really good. Over the years, scholars have studied let me pull the chat back up. Over the years, scholars have studied the phenomenon of serial murder and tried to explain the cause that originate it. Despite the studies about the types of serial killers, the dynamics, the context, and the complex psychological mechanisms which lead a serial killer to murder, organic factors or social nature were identified, but none of these answered the question why some individuals become serial killers. In spite of the types have been studied, the dynamics, the context, the complex psychological mechanisms give rise to the death of activities by these individuals. This is the focal point and the problem we want to solve. This paper will try to outline two basic phases, which represent the alpha and omega of the world of serial killers, from fantasy to enacting the murder. Introduction. Fantasy is the driving element in a serial killer's life, and as a result plays an integral role in the murder itself. The killer is not only pushed to kill by their thought patterns, but is essentially incited to murder by an intrusive fantasy life. Their early learned view that violence against other humans is a normal and acceptable way of getting what they want serves to virtually encourage murder. And just as in addiction, their ambivalent views towards societal values encourage them to try a prescribed behavior. And just a quick note, when you're thinking of Kegan Kline, I'm sure we're all thinking about the same things we've heard, from Murder Sheet to others. He grew up in a very violent home where physical violence was normalized, which it should never be. And this is a kid that created his own fantasy world to escape. When people do that, it's to escape. And so, insecure and already living in a fantasy. So it doesn't take much to think that he would progress in his through the phases. And so anyways. Within the murder, there are many reflections of fantasy. Even among the serial killers who had little or no conscious plans of murder, there is still a great deal of evidence in their belief structures for unconscious fantasy. The murder as a whole is an integral part of the serial killer's sexual fantasy. Crime scenes tend to echo elements. Crime scenes tend to echo elements of the fantasy in such things as the condition of the body's state of dress and position, and the visibility of the disposal locale. As the years pass, the future killer's reliance on fantasy only increases. It continues to substitute for real feelings of control. We know this is about power to you, Doug Carter. And as a vent for anger, and also comes to compensate for feelings of low self-esteem. He definitely has those. I mean, he's not even, he's used this Anthony shots. Like, look at the thumbnail art. Like, come on. He picked his polar opposite because that's how he would like to look. But he knows he doesn't, and he's self-conscious about it. So as a result, their reliance on fantasy and as a result of childhood abuse, the future killer has developed a series of negative personality traits, which results in only increased isolation. This is a kid that lived a very isolated life, even though he was traveling around and bumming off couches. It's a lot like Greeno. Like, he's very isolated, even though he's around other people, but he's still on the computer. This guy's still just like on his phone. where did I leave? As a result of their reliance on fantasy and as a result of childhood abuse, the future killer has developed a series of negative personality traits, which results in only increased isolation. Just read that. These traits include a preference for autoerotic activity, aggression, chronic lying, definitely does that, rebelliousness, and a preference for fetish behavior. Interesting. The killer's initial difficulty in distinguishing between reality and fantasy continues to grow, fueled by the negative personality traits and inability to distinguish fantasy and to distinguish. They are unable to distinguish fantasy from reality. The future killer fails to adequately develop social relationships. The early isolation leading to antisocial acts is fueled by the acts, and increased isolation results. The isolation and antisocial behavior build into a feedback cycle, resulting in more violent behavior on the part of the killer and even greater isolation from society. The lack of punishment resulting from the future killer's violent behavior is a type of reinforcement. And that's just a known thing with children. The killer's childhood fantasy and thinking patterns stimulate only themselves, and while reducing tension, serve only to further their alienation. The social isolation, the result of early antisocial behavior in fantasy, only increases the child's reliance on fantasy. This isolation is reformed into even greater anger against society. So then you have this like catch-22 of a person that is like antisocial, and they're isolated, but they still have a fantasy of that, and it makes them angry at the society that they're want to be a part of. This isolation is reformed into, okay, I read that. The killer's early reliance on fantasy leads to violent acts. I already read. The increased isolation leads to even more anger. Read that. And vastly increased dependence. So they become dependent on the fantasy. That is their escape. The self-feeding cycle of isolation, anger, and fantasy only serves to catapult the future killer even farther away from what society views as normal, and even closer to the act of homicide. By the time of sexual development and autoerotic experimentation, fantasy is well on its way into its final role, that of sole coping device. Man's ability to rehearse and anticipate positive outcomes from his behavior, and ability to reinforce self through forethought and planning through imagination and fantasy is what has gone terribly wrong here. The serial killer, though outwardly secure and apparently stable, is in reality terribly insecure. That is a big one right there. Like with these personality types, like they're normally the bravado. It's just bravado. It's a false sense of self. And when really in reality, they have such a low self-esteem that blowing an eyelash off of your cheek, that's how tender their self-worth is. Where was I? When the killer is not in complete control. Okay, so yeah. When the killer is not in complete control of the situation, he feels helpless without power. Pretty powerful little sentence there. Fantasy here is like other forms of addiction. Yes, lending a form of temporary self-esteem. It's that temporary, quick adrenaline, endorphin infused quick fix. The extreme violence of some killers is entangled with this low self-esteem. Found a correlation between high levels of violence and low self-concept. Self-concept is just, like they don't, like I always, I think it's so important that people are able to take a look in the mirror, and like that's their like self-concept, the what you see reflecting back, consciously, subconsciously, of like when you really dig into getting to know yourself, and a deep, well thought out person that knows why they do what they do not fall into traps of fantasy versus reality. That's why it's so important to do that self analyzation. Fantasy has become a situation in which the killer is always in control, always powerful. This fantasy has gone so far as to become another reality for the killer, equivalent to and as viable as the real world. Indeed, the fantasy world is so real to the killer that he believes he can move between fantasy and reality, that there is no distinguishable difference. Murder is not the isolated event which the media and public view it to be. Rather, it is the logical outgrowth and extension of the serial killer's fantasy life. Fantasy is the drive mechanism for the murder. And even though fantasy preceded murder, the act of murder has, in a sense, solidified the fantasy. So, begat. The serial killer's great difficulty in differentiating between fantasy and reality has been pushed over the edge by the act of murder. The acting out of the fantasy has linked it with the real world. In the serial killer's mind, the fantasy has become reality. In the words of the FBI, the offender believes he can now control reality. Essentially, sexual homicide is an act of control, dominance, and performance that is representative of an underlying fantasy embedded with violence, sexuality, and death. Though it is not immediately obvious in all cases, it is nonetheless true that the serial killer murders to preserve the fantasy. Murders to preserve the fantasy. Often the fantasy is of murder, and the only way to keep it alive is to act it out. The protection of the fantasy may have been required by a variety of factors, some of which are external, such as an interruption by the victim of the offender's feeling of dominance or being enraged at the victim's behavior. The murder is not recognized as such by the killer. Rather, most killers described an unbearable urge to kill. Have you ever, let's just go with like something simple, we don't have to get too deep, but like Diet Coke or like caffeine or a cigarette or something that a game on your phone. And when you finally get to the point where you're like, I have to quit. And then you do, and you just like, ooh, that's where that sense of urgency comes. But for these types, obviously it is heightened to a place of not craving a Diet Coke. They're craving murdering someone else in this fantasy. As a rule, however, the more the serial killer murders, the greater the psychological gain. The fantasies survive and are elaborated upon, and the behavior of the killer is reinforced. Just as fantasy and isolation fed each other, so the murder fuels the fantasy and the fantasy fuels the murder. The serial killer does not stop on his own accord. Unless prevented, the serial killer will kill again and again. Each successful murder exhilarates the killer, both confirming and reinforcing the act. Simply put, serial killers tend to increase their killings it appears. They have to kill often to maintain their equilibrium, their balance. The fantasy and psychic high that they obtain induces bold and more frequent attacks. sometimes with a complete disregard of risk. You see this in a lot of different serial killers. You see this in, I mean, go down the list. Kemper, Bundy, Gacy, freaking Raider, you know, what's the name of the guy that I love? And I don't love, but I love to like dive into the psyche of him in freaking Alaska. There's two in Alaska that are really like titillating as far as just understanding the psychology of murder. But anyways, that's they have at some point, it's all of this fantasy life, and then but then the urge gets to be so great, and then they get haphazard. The feelings of success. Wait. One murder is no longer enough. The killer must kill again, and as the killings grow, he begins to require them more often. The feelings of success, of self-worth, begin to stem from the killings only. All serial killers follow this pattern, increasing the frequency of their killings. By this time, there are no remaining internal forces that will stop the serial killer's actions. And to date, you know, because I do think that they have some pretty strong signatures that would definitely be signatures. And that would be a signature is like, what I'm talking about is like when like a killer, they have to do this to complete the fantasy of murder. They have to do this certain things. So whether it's leaving a mark, taking socks, leaving the body posed, the different things like that, leaving a object near the bodies, or taking, just a jewelry, anything, then that would be considered like a signature, and it would be hard. I mean, there have been that have just changed a little, did that a lot, like just changed their MO completely because their fantasy was just more about kill, 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 and the power and control that they get from rape and murder because they want to keep the victim quiet. So you do see some, but I think that's not really the case here. And so like you would think that this killer would only become more, we would see, they would, not us, but they would see some kind of a pattern in what they search for as far as like VICAP and things like that. And but so far they haven't. And I do think that there are certain things that they are looking for, just because of with what was his name? Brian Chadwell. They were at Riley within no time flat. The Delphi investigators, the FBI, Delphi investigators, ISP, they were there to interview that little girl very soon after that happened. And I know that from family that worked there. And so I think that there was something that happened during the commission of that particular crime. He's not guilty of Delphi. That was so similar to Delphi that they were compelled to go and take a gander. Israel Keys. Yes. Thank you. Okay. No problem. Hello, Ordy. It's never going to come out. QWERTY. There we go. Hey, Amy. Hey, Chaotic Beauty and Crime. How are you? Hey, Nick. Good to have you here. Now I got to remember. Oh, looks like I marked it. This is, in certain respects, no different from the alcoholic using their drink of choice as a coping mechanism. Just as addicts tend to fall into a downward spiral unless all else in their lives centers around the addictive substance, the serial killer's life begins to revolve around fantasy. The revolution becomes so dominating that eventually fantasy becomes the center of the serial killer's life. And just as the heroin addict need for a fix may drive him to steal, the serial killer's obligation to the fantasy drives him to murder. In short, the cycle of the serial killer is no different from the cycle of any other addict. the end result of murder being functionally the same as the heroin addict's theft. In general, the theoretical perspective, which provides the best explanation of serial murder, is that based on the systemic relational model, according to this explanation, the individual taking into account one's innate characteristics is under the influence of the systems in which he is inserted and the relationships he has established with others in the environment. Scholars have also stressed the importance of the presence of traumatic experiences in childhood and adolescence of serial killers. I wanted to make a note that it does say in there, one of the detectives and Kegan Kline were talking about the fact that he has seizures. That is in what I just read there, and then the trauma of having a crazy dad. The homicide. Scholars have also stressed the importance of the presence of traumatic experiences in childhood and adolescence of serial killers. Just read that. Defining them as the product of the family of origin and the parental background. This element unites the individual and any special physiological characteristics. If in the family and in society relationships become negative and disruptive, the serial killer loses the sense of reality. The homicidal action briefly reassembles the psychological system of the subject until other negative factors interfere. In light of this, serial homicidal behavior can be seen as a result of three factors: individual, social, and environmental relational. So individual, social, and environmental relational, which are interwoven with each other, and the change from one serial killer to another. The individual factors include all of the personal characteristics of a serial killer. The socio-environmental factors includes all of the social components that can affect the behavior of a serial murderer. The relational factor is a synthesis of the other two factors, and there's meeting point. This factor is a measure of the degree of exchange between the individuals and the environment and the way in which the subject behaves with others. In this field, there is a tendency of many authors to only consider serial killers as those individuals whose murders are in some way linked to sexual disorders. In fact, a single explanation for all serial killers does not exist, because the reason for serial homicidal behavior can be manifold. As regards to taxonomy of serial murder, it must be pointed out that there are multiple ways of classifying it. A serial murder is connected to the motive and focuses on the reason that prompted the subject to conduct serial homicide. That's the crust of it right there. It's the crux. Secondly, a serial murder classification can be made in relation to the number of people who are killed by the serial killer. Some serial killers commit their first murder individually and subsequent murders in pairs or in groups. In this case, it refers to a serial murders committed in bearable numbers. Another classification criterion relates to the degree of planning the murder. The homicidal behavior can swing between an absolute planning of all aspects of the crime and a total lack of organization. Or the serial murder can be schedule only a few stages of the murder, which are considered most important in the realization of their ritual. So ritual in the sense of they have this fantasy that they've built out, and now they want to make that fantasy, the lines get blurred, and fantasy is reality now, and they have to do this, and it's no different than a alcoholic taking a drink in their mind. It's just obviously not socially acceptable. Which are considered most important in the realization of their ritual. Finally, some authors have identified various stages in serial homicidal behavior. Is everybody understanding this? Do you get it? Is this article kind of connecting and like making sense? Is it only interesting because I'm a big, huge geek, like a big nerd? Like, give me some feedback here. I'll wait. Sorry, I'm dressing my freaking back. Actually, I'm going to go and grab my heating pad. So I'm such a forking old lady, you guys. Oh, goodness. Oh. I was going to try ice again. I did go to the doctor today. It's a freaking bulging disc. So that sucks. And the insurance, of course, you know, I wanted to get a cortisone shot or just like something immediate for my vacation. But no. It's not to be. Not to be. They, you have to do, they gave me some medication. They gave me prednisone, which I'm not looking forward to taking that, but I'll do just about anything right now. And a muscle relaxer, which I'm pretty sure they don't work. So who knows? But yeah. And then 4 weeks of physical therapy, then see the doctor again. And then they will do an MRI. And then that's after the MRI is when you can get cortisone shots. So that sucks. So Cordy says it's interesting. Lipsa says, yes, absolutely. Reinforces pretty much everything I know. Yeah. Sorry to hear. No, it's okay. Amy Celeste is commenting about it. So that's good. I'm going to read probably one more section, and I think it's 10. So my child will be home and in need of her room soon. So I'm going to read one more section, then we'll pick this up on the live next week. We'll have it late next week since I'm going on vacation again. So we'll get back to this. Let's see how long this chapter is. Okay, it's not too bad. A serial killer's fantasy. When the serial killer murders his first victim, he activates what is known as a cyclical mechanism, entering a circular, complex mental process like an addiction, which leads him to kill again. The murderer becomes, therefore, the transportation of one or more mental images within a real context, and the dynamic process is bound to repeat itself with particular features of rituals. The imagination is the fundamental element of the human psyche through which we can change reality, replace something, review the past, and anticipate the future. This is most commonly used by adults as much as children to gain and maintain control over an imagined situation. It can be defined as the imaginative process by which a subject attempts to obtain substitute gratification through activities experienced in the mind that he is not able to actually experience in reality. Through imagination, any mood, such as anger, for example, begins to take shape, oriented toward a specific goal in a specific direction. The elaboration of fantasy begins at an early age. During childhood, children take refuge in fantasy, and according to family context in which they grow up, project what they have learned or experienced as a way of relating to others. Living and growing up in a dysfunctional and hostile environment can generate psychological consequences for the child who will seek refuge in fantasy. The child will create a personal imaginary world and will project the hostility and hatred that the child has experienced in the real world. In fantasies, an individual can imagine the self to be immense and without limits. The main difference between a criminal and a normal subject is that the former believes to have some sort of divine right to satisfy his fantasies. Let's read that one more time. The serial killer's imagination plays a major role as he begins to fantasize about acts to be performed in order to express dominance over another human being. The decision-making power of life and death infuses a feeling of omnipotence, all-powerful. He will live this fantasy compulsively, and as individual scenes are revived, he will relive every single fragment and moment of madness as a unique and great experience, which must inevitably be carried out. When his delusional fantasies reach a peak, it is time to enjoy his actions of the murder until a new emotional necessity or compulsion leads him to kill again. For the serial murderer, the victim is like a checkers pawn to be manipulated at will in order to win the game. These individuals compensate for their social loneliness by threatening their fantasy world, which is in fact dominated by their imagination. The more time spent fantasizing, the faster he will become dependent on the fantasies that feed the sense of self. At one point, he feels obliged to enact the fantasies, dominate the victims, and transform them into objects to be used for his pleasure. Objects to be used. Any serial killer, regardless of the reason behind the murders, always begins his destructive path due to fantasy. The murder is lived obsessively through increasingly elaborate fantasies fueled by intense and prolonged exposure to violent pornography. This predisposition towards sexualized and aggressive fantasies is key in most serial killers. We learned from the Kegan Kline police interview that some of the videos that he had in his Dropbox on his phone and other places downloaded were that of bestiality, the using children using objects on themselves. Like these are things that are not they're into that fetish category. The fantasy and the violence is discredited. In fact, a favorite recreational activity for serial killers from an early age is performing actions which transform into real aggressive fantasies that progressively have assumed a role of utmost importance with the psyche of the child. Early fantasies of a sexual and aggressive nature generate more and more violent behavior episodes, starting with the creation of violent fantasies on inanimate objects. Then moving on to animals. So like destroying a tree, setting a fire, taking a razor blade to your carpet, and just destructive behavior that is violent and has an undertone of sadism usually. And then it moves to animals until reaching the victimization of others who are considered human beings. Yet they are mere objects whose function is to satisfy their fantasies. So you see this a lot with Kegan and the child pornography is like he is so detached from the fact that these are actual children, you know, and the depravity of that is real clear in the interviews. Numerous studies have confirmed that most serial killers show a high proficiency oriented view towards death and all that concerns it, such as serial killers. So, you know, we have him. That's why they threw that in. And that was one of the things where it was like, oh, he is paying attention. If you remember in the interview he did, they threw in, because he had looked up, Sandy Hook victims, and they threw that in, and he was like, well, why is that? And, you know, and then he stops himself, you know, but it seems like he was gonna say, because he said, well, that's not, and then he trails off. And what he's saying, he's differentiating between looking up Sandy Hook dead children versus looking up pre-teen, like teen pornography, looking up and sharing and all of that. Like that was kind of telling about like what I think. He is pretty smart. I think he plays real dumb, and I think that he's smart in the way of like how a con man is smart. He's good at manipulating, but only to a certain extent, because he's definitely not good at it in person, you know. It's just behind a screen, he can be powerful. He can be in control. And what would incite someone like that to kill is the fantasy of being the isolated is no longer enough. Like, I want to go and I want to meet. I want to like, and then say he gets there and he's laughed at because he's overweight and not cute. He's definitely not Anthony Schatz, who is hot. Let's just be real. He is not anything of that ideal white man American, you know, like that thing that everybody like clings to and seems to worship is just that Abercrombie and Fitch, that you know. And so it's fitting that he took that image and that's who he portrayed himself to be online. And then he also says in there, they ask him about the Emily Ann and why he used that, and he was like, well, it makes me more approachable. They would be more likely to share things with me, you know. And that's like, wow, I think that's really telling about how much forethought he put into the actions that he did, that he took. Oh gosh, where in the world did I leave off? Responds better to the needs. But favorite record of serial killers from early. Okay, so numerous studies have confirmed that most serial killers show a high proficiency oriented view towards death, and that concerns it, such as serial killer Pedro Alonso Lopez, Theodore Robert Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Daniel Carmoga Barbosa, Richard Ramirez, Henry Holmes, Harold Shipman. Confirmation of this view can be determined from the fact that when they are arrested, serial killers are often able to recount the dynamics of their crimes with a meticulous attention to detail. And that's where you see Kegan slip up a bunch. If you really read it and absorb that interview, he knows exactly what he's doing. And this, I don't remember. Well, my psyche must have kept me from remembering. All of that, in my opinion, it is a play. He's playing with them. He's messing around, messing about. During the developmental period, the serial killer processes a highly developed system of fantasy to defend against a traumatic reality that he cannot accept. He cannot accept the compartmentalizer. Oof. As an adult, the level of processing of fantasy allows him to relive the trauma suffered by reversing the roles to where they're the ones in control. They're the ones in power. And you can see this on a scale down, like look at eating disorders, addictions. Look at, like, an eating disorder is a way of that person. It's not about the weight. I mean, that's what their focus is on, and it's about the control. Like, I can do this, I can be in control. And when they're having like a bad day, well, like an anorexic or bulimic will get way worse, because they're trying so hard to keep control of their environment. And it's a really powerful, and then when we were talking earlier about like that need to, that drive to, that addiction to just take it on a simpler, like a game. Some people have addictive personalities, some people don't. I do, and I know it, and I have to be really careful with things that you can get addicted to, even if it's a freaking game on my phone. Like, I play this fishdom game, and I will just obsessively play, and I'll make excuses of why it's okay for me to continuously play this game. And to the point where I'm like riding a car and I'll be like, nope, it's not going to happen. I won't get a car sick this time. I'm not going to get a headache, because A, B, C, and D, that are just really things that I'm telling myself so that I can do what I want. And then when it comes time to like, okay, one more game and you're done. One more game and you're done. And then when you're finally done, you're just like, oh, I want to play that game, and it's the same thing with any kind of substance that you can get addicted to. You can get addicted to knowledge. I do that a lot. I will obsessively research things, and it's just a way that I can control my environment. I usually do it when I am feeling out of control. I do have OCD. Okay. During the developmental period, the serial killer processed a highly developed system of fantasy to defend against a traumatic reality that he cannot accept. As an adult, the levels of processing of fantasy allows him to relive the trauma suffered by reversing the roles. Thus, in his mind, he is no longer the passive victim, but becomes an active aggressor. This role reversal makes it possible to momentarily overcome the trauma through a virtual revenge situation. So, and all of this is goes back to emotional intelligence. I believe that's the key thing of you got 4 kids growing up in the same exact environment with the same 2 parents, and one of them ends up being a serial killer, and the other one ends up being a social worker helping kids less fortunate. Like that. What is the difference? They're both still living in a fantasy that they are trying to control. The one that goes to be that helper is still doing the same thing that the one that goes to be the serial killer, but the serial killer avenue is frowned upon. Going around killing people is not an okay thing to be doing. You don't have the right to go around killing people. You do have you have the right to go around helping people. And so emotional intelligence is what divides that. But you'll see one that is completely like, they have a very balanced sense of self, very well put together. And then you have the one that has turned to everything like Mother Teresa. And then you have the evil, psychopath that turns to that. And I think that in those 3 types of the way that we transform our childhood into adulthood, sorry, this fan is blowing my hair right in my face. Is dependent on that innate emotional intelligence that we're just like born with. You could see it. I don't know if any of you ever went to church. You could see it in a nursery, plain as day. a children's nursery of just full of like the same age. They're all basically all, barely walking or, just 2 and under. They already have such a deep, that id. You can see their characteristics already playing out. Like, I'll never forget, it was my daughter. She there was a little boy that was getting dropped off, and for some reason the church had like this door that you would just put the kids over. It was like so weird, just like fork and open it. I don't know. Anyway, and so his parent had put him down, and I mean, this kid was flipping out. Like, it was the end of his world. And my daughter toddled right over to him and tried to give him a hug, and he pushed her down. And she just was like, she just couldn't even, you could just see the bewilderment on her face. And what did she do? She got right back up and she went over to that little boy and she tried to give him a hug again. And he pushed her down. And then she thought better of it. And then she just kind of sat there. She sat there with this little boy. And eventually this little boy calmed down. And then she had a new friend. And, and I could see it with my other daughter. She was the opposite. She was the little boy scared to death, crying, and didn't want anybody to even look at her. Like, just leave me alone and let me be with my mommy. That was kind of her. And I had to really push her to get past some of that innateness of wanting to be just secluded, because it's she doesn't need to be as outgoing, and that's never going to be, but you want to teach your kids balance. And so that was one thing that was just something that you could see the emotional intelligence in a nursery. And not that the crying kid is more or less intelligent than my daughter, since I used her as an example, but it's just you can start to see personalities emerge. That little kid that is constantly like picking on everyone, and you add those innate characteristics to a family dynamic that is completely toxic, and maybe a head injury or seizure disorder or something like that, and you're looking at a psychopath born. For each serial murder, fantasy is the central element of a murder. According to the following scheme, relational concerns the way in which the criminal fantasizes about establishing a relationship with a future victim. An extreme variant of an imagined relationship is the master-slave one, which is very exciting for the subject because it allows him to fully exercise his domination and control needs. Paraphilia concerns the sexual sphere of the fantasy. The criminal acts almost always start from a set of sexual perversions, which are a concrete expression of his inter-fantasy world. Hello. Situational represents that part of the fantasy with regards to the setting in which the criminal wants to carry out the murder and how he wishes to kill the victim. The subject can fantasize about building a torture chamber and maybe wish to take the victim to a remote forest, or dress the victim in a certain way and let her pronounce certain words in order to increase the excitement. To implement this component, the ritual criminal becomes a director who organizes the crime scene at his will. All about power. Type of victim. The serial killer needs to choose a specific type of victim that reflects his fantasy as regards to gender, age, race, complexion, and height. All those aspects that make the prey unique and irreplaceable in the killer's mind. The attack is part of the ritual that allows the subject to find momentary relief from their internal tensions, and the energy is channeled to the kind of victim that responds better to the needs of the criminal. Self-perception. The last component concerns the way in which the murderer is perceived within the fantasy. A serial killer can have a diversity of roles, which can range from interpreting the feelings of complete inadequacy to a sense of divine omnipotence, through which he can exercise absolute control over another human being whom he cannot control in daily life. Now we go back to like that the ego versus the what actually is, that bravado, and underneath it is just a scared little brat boy that didn't get enough attention or got abused. And I think, and the thing is like, you can take Kegan and you can see him as I'm reading this. I can see him kind of coming to light in some of the things I'm reading. And then there's other aspects of him where I think that he's just a lazy turd. And he does all the things that he does because he doesn't have to leave a seat. He could just lay around and do all this. And I guarantee you he's making money on selling the those docs, Dropbox things. And he wasn't doing maybe one or two times, but I'm sure he wasn't making thousands of dollars at it. And I wonder this of like, how much cash did he give old girl? Like, was he giving the person that he was living with, was he giving her cash that she was then depositing in her bank account? And like, how did he get the money? Like, obviously he's not going to put the money in the bank account, or they probably would have talked about it in the interview. So he's a broke joker who slums off other people and couch surfs and just jerks off in their bathroom. So you're looking at a complete and utter loser who is out of control. And then he's just, so that's like another side to him. And to where it kind of makes you think about him in a different light, depending on which avenue however you want to perceive the information. And that's another thing about making sure that you have your mind strong against just going along, sos facilio. You got to know what you stand for so you don't fall for anything. And while we can see Kegan, at least I don't want to speak for you, I can see Kegan emerging as I read this. I have to be able to see the flip side of that. And what I just said, I believe all of those things are true too. So how do we fit that in? Or do we even try? Is it our place? I doubt it. Do we like to? I do. I like to try to understand what makes people the way that they are. I've always been that way, and I will continue to be that way, and I don't apologize for it. But yeah, I think this article is really telling just on, this is why we're here. This is why we're in this weird world because we're all drawn here for whatever reason, whether it's figuring out a mystery, a pattern, understanding the like site, what makes people tick, loving, research and figuring out pieces that fit. For me, patterns is that I've always been really good with patterns. I love them. I can memorize them. I can see them, and not necessarily in true crime and just in anything. There's always a pattern. There's a pattern to literally everything in this world. Everything. And so, yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that kind of thing. And this was a good way to divert my OCD into something that was not affecting my daughter because of her health conditions. Because before I was obsessively trying to become a geneticist, I was excessively trying to become a radiologist, neurologist, cardiologist, pulmonologist, on and on down the road. And it was unhealthy, and it was negatively affecting my child. So I needed to change my behavior, but I still needed to feel like I had some kind of control over it. And so I turned that obsession over and the compulsion to do something about it, to ritualize it, to fix it, into instead of researching medical stuff, I turned it into researching this, which I have always been drawn to because of the murder of my aunt when I was little, and later my friend, and the different way that violence and criminality has affected my family and my extended family. I find that dynamic to be very interesting, especially when it's generational. It's pretty crazy, and it makes you look at the epigenetic profile of each person as well as their nature. Well, let me go back and just say goodbye because I heard the door shut. Hey, Chris, glad you came. Yeah. Website designer, rock star, bounty hunter, dealer, photographer, ordained minister, race car driving, Instagram model, rich guy. That good point, Amy. Good point. I just always like to try to play devil's advocate, I guess. It's just because I feel like, especially in this world, like you'll hear a creator talk and there's a lot of responsibility in there, or at least there should be. And like, just because I say something doesn't mean that it's like freaking gospel. And the same with all of these old loonies out here. Like, just because they say something and they can make a sound and make it a sound reasonable doesn't mean that it actually is reasonable or true. Yeah, honestly, a lot in common. You're a pattern person too. Uh-oh. Ooh, what'd they get up about? I couldn't see the screen. Audiobook with annotations. Well, true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, great point. That interrogation also ironically shows confusion between whether a question is to be answered in context of fantasy. Yeah, at one point in it, the detective actually says, like, okay, Anthony Shots. See, now, and basically, like, I don't think that was like a typo, or I think he was kind of calling him on his bullshit of like, okay, well, then it was Anthony Shots. And then he says, yeah, yep, right. And it's like he does it on and on and on in this thing. But yeah. Okay, well, good. Good. We got a Chris comment to go out on tonight. I'll say one thing, that whoever's responsible for the murder of Abby and Libby has caused a ton of headaches and heartaches. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. And I hope that he is caught very, very soon. And I hope that they find what they're looking for in the Wabash River. And they're not going to do a search like that at this capacity for this amount of time and the money that it is taking to do this without it being something pretty big. But then again, you got to think they did say the largest, most like child pornography ring in Indiana's history. That's a big deal. I did notice in a part of the interview where they asked him about a thumb, like an SD card. And he's like, I can't remember if they said USB. And he's like, that's just for and he like answers them like real, like, because he's wishy-washy. Well, I don't know. I don't remember. No. But in this one, he was like, so adamant that had nothing to do, like it's just a USB, so that it's for the Wi-Fi. It says Wi-Fi on it. And then they were like, okay, well, we're gonna add that to our search. And you could see that he was kind of like trying to prove his point that it was nothing. And that made me obviously pay attention to it. So they could literally be looking for a cell phone. There are dogs that are trained to look for cell phones. They have them in the schools, so yeah, like that could be something. But it is, my time is up, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great weekend, because I will be gone and there is no internet. There's no Wi-Fi where I'm going. And so it is off the grid, and it is so nice. So I will see you guys in about the middle of next week. I hope you have a good one.